the finite element model for plates and shells problem. So plates and shells are very special problems, and they are essentially uh, extensions of what you know as structural elements as beams and arches. So beams and arches are one-dimensional domain, and if you stretch beam to uh, another dimension, then it becomes a plate, more or less, because structurally the action is similar. Shells is again, uh, you have an arch, you extend it, it becomes a cylindrical shell. Of course, you can have curvature in both the directions. So arch shell is actually much more general than just a stretch of arch. But stretching arch in the direction perpendicular to the plane of arch, is one of the shells that you can recognize as cylindrical shells in several assembly halls or several large gathering arenas. Yeah, hello Charu, greetings. So, do you have any question? Okay, fine. Yes, rigid diaphragm, rigid diaphragm. Yeah, sure. So, what is your query? What was the question? So let us take up that. We will discuss about rigid diaphragm in detail. So let me Okay, so before we take up this question, this discussion of finite element modeling of plates and shells, let us briefly stop to discuss this uh, very common assumption that you make about rigid floor diaphragm. Uh, it is, of course, so just to emphasize the point, let us take a simple portal. Right? So this is a portal frame with rigid joints, rigid jointed members, moment resistant frame, and the nodes are given by 1, 2, 3, 4. And these are the elements 1, 2, 3. And this is probably I can just say this is L, and I can say this is H. So if I have coordinate system origin at node 1, then this is the coordinate system, and I can have connectivity matrix as element node I, node J. So element 1, node I is 1, the coordinates are 0, 0. Node J is 3, coordinates are 0, H. Element number 2, node I is node 3, coordinates are 0, H. Node J is 4, coordinates are LH. Element number 3, I can say ith node is node 4, coordinates are LH, and jth node is node 2, coordinates are L0. So these are the elements and the nodes which define these elements along with the coordinates. And if I look at the degrees of freedom, modeling this by a frame element would give us U3, V3, theta 3, U4, V4, theta 4, and then we have U1, U1, V1, theta 1, U2, V2, theta 2. Right? So the boundary conditions, of course, impose that are defined for this problem are that these 3 degrees of freedom are restrained at node 1, and these 3 degrees of freedom are restrained at node 2. So there are a total of 6 degrees of freedom that are left in this structure. Oh, this is not visible. So we consider this simple portal made of comprising 3 members, 3 elements, and this is the mesh connectivity using Euler-Bernoulli beam elements. For simplicity, we are only using single element over the entire span, although it is prudent to use at least 2 elements to model one span, right? But just to drive home the point conceptually, the issue that we are discussing of rigid diaphragm action and what is happening with rigid diaphragm action, this should serve the purpose. But this is, I would emphasize again that this is a very coarse model we generally do not, it is not recommended to have only one element covering the entire span. You should at least have two elements to model the one span of the beam or beam column. So it's a two-dimensional plane frame, XY plane, and each node has 3 degrees of freedom: displacement along x, displacement along y, and a rotation in XY plane. So node 1 will have displacements u1, v1, theta 1. Node 2 will have displacements u2, v2, theta 2. Node 3 will have displacements u3, v3, theta 3. And node 4 will have displacements u4, v4, and theta 4. The boundary conditions of the problem are such that node 1 and node 2 are fully restrained, so that all these 3 degrees of freedom at node 1, they will be constrained, they will be restrained, so they do not have any freedom to deform either along x, y, or even in the rotation. So this is rigidly anchored at this point, as well as for node 2. Node 2 is also rigidly anchored, so all these 3 degrees of freedom, they vanish, right? So full fixity at nodes 1 and 2, this is the boundary condition. Now that leaves two nodes, node 3 and node 4, and at each node we have 3 degrees of freedom. So a total of 6 degrees of freedom for two free nodes. Right? Now, out of these 6 degrees of freedom, let us look at the kinematics between them, which is in this figure, which do you think would be much larger? Okay, let me just say there is a force here and there is a force here. So what is the relative likelihood or relative order of deformation between different degrees of freedom? What is your assessment, engineering sense? The system is most flexible in the lateral direction. There is no restraint whatsoever. I mean, the top floor, what you call as sway, right? And there is a horizontal load to boot. So the columns are free to sway. They are slender columns, tall and slender columns. So they behave like a cantilever beam. So they would be moving. Displacements in along this force P in the horizontal lateral deformations are going to be much larger in magnitude than what you expect the displacements at these points, vertical displacements at these points. And of course, being symmetrically loaded, the rotation is of course going to be zero at these nodes, at the nodes 3 and 4. Right? So the point here is, of all the 6 deformations, the deformation U is going to be much larger than any of these. I mean, it would be orders of magnitude of difference between the several orders of magnitude. So for all practical purposes, we can ignore, we can neglect the deformations V1 and V2 as being insignificant in comparison with deformations U1 and U2. Right? Lateral stiffness is much smaller than the stiffness in vertical direction. The vertical direction, you have all these columns and they are perfectly, anchored at the base, and they are very, axial rigidity is very high compared to the flexural rigidity. So lateral stiffness is much smaller. So therefore, lateral deformations of columns are several orders of magnitude larger than the vertical deformations. So a fallout of this is vertical deformations can be ignored in comparison with the lateral or horizontal deformations. Right? So vertical deformations can be ignored if those are very small in comparison with the lateral deformations. Sometimes this assumption may not be valid, and when vertical deformations are not really negligible, and that would be the case in case of very tall buildings when the gravity load itself is very large, that the axial deformations are significant, then of course it cannot be ignored. But for mid-rise, low to mid-rise buildings, generally the vertical deformations are very small in comparison with the lateral deformations. and axial rigidity is much larger. For example, let's look at the numbers. What is the axial rigidity going to be? Axial rigidity is AE by L, and flexural rigidity is going to be uh, it's a cantilever beam, so
EI by
12 EI by L cube, right? Deformation at the free end of the cantilever, isn't it? So what are the representative numbers? Let's look at the cross section. Uh, let's take a square cross section 300 by 300, uh, reasonable number, and L maybe 3 meters, right? So area is of course zero point 0.3 multiplied by zero point 0.3, so 0.09 square meters, and I is of course going to be 0.3 multiplied by 0.3 cube divided by 12. So that is equal to
6.75
6.75
into 10 to the power minus 4.
into 10 to the power minus 12
4.
minus 4. Okay, meter to the power 4. And E is of course going to be, let's say, 5700 multiplied by M25 just for simplicity. So that gives us 5700 multiplied by 5. So that would be how much?
28500.
28500, and that would be 2.8 10 raised to the power 10 Newton per meter square, right? So 2850 would be in MPa, and if I convert it to Pascal, that is Newton per square meter, then that would be 2.85 multiplied by 10 to the power 10 uh, Newton per meter square. So let's work out these numbers. AE by L, what is the stiffness? AE by L. So 2850, 2.85 exponential 10 multiplied by 0.09 divided by 3. So that is 855 into 10 to the power 6 Newton per meter. And this is going to be 12 multiplied by 2.85 exponential 10 multiplied by 6.75 exponential minus 4 divided by 12. What did I do? 12 multiplied by 2.85 divided by 87. So this is equal to 855 multiplied by 10 raised to the power 4 Newton per meter. So you see, the lateral stiffness is 2 orders of magnitude smaller than the uh, axial stiffness. So the axial deformations are going to be much smaller than the lateral deformation if the lateral forces and the vertical forces are of the same order of magnitude. If P and W are of the similar orders of magnitude, then by virtue of this fact that the axial deformation, axial rigidity is much larger than the flexural rigidity, this frame would actually sway much more, I mean almost 100 times more than the vertical deformation. So in this situation, it makes sense, engineering sense, to ignore vertical deformation in comparison with the lateral deformations. So you can practically say that the degrees of freedom, and since this is rigid jointed frame, so rotations at the joint rotation is also going to be zero or negligible, particularly when the load is symmetric, although symmetry may not always be possible, but even in that case, the joint rotations are going to be much smaller than the horizontal deformation. So then that leaves us with only 2 degrees of freedom, U2 and, okay, what is this, U3? U3 and U4. V2, rather I would say V3, V4, theta 3, theta 4 are negligible, right? So I am not saying that they are zero, they are just too small in comparison with these horizontal displacements of these free nodes. So the uh, amount by which these free nodes will move, they are going to be much, much larger than these 2 degrees of freedom. And uh, even for the usual dimensions that you come across, you find that, I mean, you can see the comparison. The axial stiffness is almost 100 times larger than the lateral stiffness. So the lateral deformations are going to be much, much larger, 100 times larger than that. So now that leaves us with these 2 degrees of freedom, right? Now, there is a force, horizontal force here, and for this beam acts as a, I mean, these 2 degrees of freedom, these nodes, node 3 and 4, they are connected by this beam. And this beam also has axial rigidity, again of the same order. I mean, it can be AE by L. Okay, so here H is something that we took as 3. So L can also be 3, so 3 meters. So again we will have the similar kind of thing. AE by L is going to be 855 multiplied by 855 multiplied by 10 to the power 6 Newton per meter. And again this is going to be very, I mean, the stretch U3, the difference between U3 and U4 is going to be very, very small. And this we are only accounting for area of cross section of the beam. When we look at this, the plan, actually the plan will look like uh, there is a beam here, right? So there are 4 beams, and they are constructed monolithically. The slab is cast monolithically with these beams. So this is the entire area that is offering resistance to the load that are coming onto it, the lateral force. So this, what is the area that it presents? The stiffness, if I can include the stiffness area of this complete assembly, not just this beam or this beam, I include the area of the beam as well as the slab that is cast into monolithically with this. It's a very massive area, right? And then the stiffness, axial rigidity is going to be much more than this. In this case, area that we have considered is only that of the beam. But in actual construction practices, we will have the slab area also contributing to the axial rigidity of the system. So when that happens, the chances, uh, the difference, the axial deformation that you will have in this system, I mean the axial deformation that this beam will have in response to, right? So this is node 3 and this is node 4. So this is the axial load, and there is no reaction, so this force will of course the only reaction is from the columns. So that is what you have here, the columns from the bottom. So there is no reaction from the other end of free end of this. So and we all know that this reaction is going to be 12 Vi by L cube multiplied by the lateral deformation that you have. So that is the shear that is developed in the columns. So when you have this, then the deformation at U3 and deformation at U4, so U4 minus U3 is going to be 0 due to very large axial rigidity of beam plus slab system, right? And this is what you call as rigid diaphragm action. So what it does is it enforces the condition that there is, first of all, it talks about, well, this is rigid diaphragm action. I will come to this term a little later. Let me first ensure, I mean, this is axial rigidity is too large. So then U3 is essentially equal to U4. So that would further reduce the entire problem to just 1 degree of freedom, U. Right? Everything else is negligible in comparison with this deformation. So U3 is same as U4 due to large axial rigidity of beam slab system. So that is one thing. Now you can see that in the plan you will have, this is one portal frame that you have, one frame, and this is another frame. Right? So this is frame A and this is frame B. What we are seeing here could be either frame A or frame B. That's a plane frame. Right? Now this load that is coming on the slab system, that will have to be distributed among frame A and frame B. These are the two frames which actually take this load, share this load. So how is this load going to be distributed? Now the dimensions of frame A, the cross section dimensions, they may be different from frame B. We don't know, right? So when we say that the rigid beam slab system acts as a rigid floor diaphragm, then by virtue of all these calculations, the numerical relative order that we discussed, this axial deformations within this diaphragm are very small, and in that sense it is very actually very rigid, and we can ignore all axial deformations within this plane, right? So when you ignore all axial deformations in this of this slab, when you ignore all axial deformations of this slab, that can only mean that under the influence of these lateral loads, whatever deformations frame B undergoes, this frame A will also undergo the same deformation. So UA and UB, they are going to be equal. UA is equal to UB for rigid diaphragm. So what does it imply? The implication is the force that is taken up. I mean, what we analyze this portal frame for, the horizontal force P here. So the out of this distributed load, that is a total force that is coming onto the frame B will take forces in proportional to the stiffness of this frame B, and frame A will take the force in proportion to stiffness of frame A. So for example, if the columns of frame A are larger, so that it will have larger flexural stiffness, lateral stiffness than frame B, then in order to maintain same deformations of the two frames UA and UB, both to move by the same amount, so that there is no axial deformation within the slab, because if frame A moves by different amount, then and frame B moves by different amount, then of course this is going to have a curvature, and that is not allowed for rigid diaphragm. So if the diaphragm is so rigid that the axial any deformation within its plane are very insignificant or very negligible, then the force that is taken by force frame A will be in proportion to the stiffness of frame A, and force that is taken by frame B will be in proportion to the stiffness of frame B, and that will be, if this is total force is, let's say F, or let's say P, then PA is going to be P multiplied by Ka divided by Ka plus Kb, and Pb is going to be P multiplied by Kb divided by Ka plus Kb. So P by Ka plus Kb is the total deformation, lateral deformation, that is the lateral force, total force, lateral force divided by the lateral stiffness. So that is the horizontal displacement, and in order to keep the same horizontal displacement for both the frames UA and UB to be equal, the force that will be taken up by the respective forces has to be in proportion with their respective stiffnesses. Of course, if the stiffnesses, both the frames have same stiffness, then it is going to be same equal force to all the both the frames. So this is what we refer to as rigid floor diaphragm, rigid diaphragm action. The other end of the spectrum is the flexible diaphragm. In flexible diaphragm, it is you may see that the axial rigidity is going to be very small. In that case, the forces proportion the forces assigned to or taken up by individual frames is in proportion with the tributary area that you all normally you do for taking the beams, transfer the load from slab to respective beams. You have that tributary area concept. So similar tributary area concept you can use to divide the total force into respective frames for flexible diaphragm. In that case, in the flexible diaphragm, you do not have this restriction that all the frames have to move by the same amount horizontal displacement. Frame A can move by different amount than frame B, and then there can be significant in-plane deformation within the diaphragm. So that is what we refer to as the flexible diaphragm. So what is in this flexible diaphragm and rigid floor diaphragm that you find confusing with what we were discussing in the finite element modeling of 2D elements or locking of elements? Was anything confusing there? Yeah, see, the whole idea is we try to keep model as simple as possible that will bring down the number of variables to solve for. So if the situation presents itself that we can reduce the number of variables just as I did, we came down from 6 degrees of freedom in the beginning to just 1 degree of freedom that we need to solve for, right? So that is what we call as shear building modeling, right? Shear building idealization. So only lateral deformations are considered, and there is a reason for that, because these are going to be much larger than any other deformation in the structure. It is not saying that there are other deformations at zero, right? I'm nowhere did I mention that these deformations are going to be zero. We are only saying that these deformations are negligible in comparison with lateral deformations, because the lateral stiffness is much smaller than the axial stiffness. So we can get reasonably good numbers to work with for our design calculations by using these simplifying assumptions. So all these modeling, structural modeling is essentially based on certain simplifying assumptions, certain kinematic constraints that we impose, which will allow us to simplify our models, and the use of simpler models of course help us in better understanding of what is going on, what is a predominant action and what is a secondary action, what is primary action and what is secondary action, and that allows us to understand the results, appreciate the results, draw inferences correctly. That entire exercise is much easier if we work with a simpler model. Of course, you can relax as many assumptions as you deem necessary and work with a very general model, but you will eventually end up with similar numbers with much larger effort. in the analysis. Right. So there are different tools for different purposes. So modeling these rigid flow diaphragm modeling, etc., these are particularly very useful for very quick back of the envelope kind of calculations. You can estimate the numbers, member forces very quickly, and just have a rough number to get an idea. Right. Of course, once you have a very sophisticated finite element engine at your disposal, then you can model these floor slabs using plate elements that we are going to discuss, and they will share degrees of freedom with the beams, and let the entire thing go on it as it is, with complete flexibility, complete using complete finite element model without throwing in any additional assumption. And most of the time you will end up with similar numbers that you typically get using these simplified models, and that's why these simplified models are very powerful and very useful. But having said that, whatever you do using simplified models, they of course need to be verified in the end by a much more rigorous analytical modeling, at least in the end. Once the design is finalized, then the design is checked using these detailed finite element models. So does that make sense? So I will stop here, and we will continue our discussion on plates and shells, finite element modeling of plates and shells, in our lecture tomorrow morning. Thank you.